A note to our listeners before we get started. This series delves into sensitive material and contains disturbing content. Please take care while listening.
At this time, I'm going to recognize Mr. Stupak for his line of questioning, and then I understand that some people on the
If you dig way back into the sound archives of the U.S. government, you get a stark reminder of just how long victims of child sexual abuse have been trying to force change.
Well, thank you. Let me thank all the witnesses for their testimony, especially Masha for your testimony.
Here's a congressional committee hearing from 2006. A child named Masha is testifying.
Let me ask you, Masha, if I may, one question. What's most important to you? Is it getting your images off the internet? Is that the most important thing to you?
Yeah, it is very important for me, but I understand that it's probably very unlikely that they all get taken off, but the thing that's most important to me right now is trying to help other people and trying to get everyone aware of the topic.
Okay. Mr. Marsh, you're Masha's attorney, and I know you're contemplating a civil litigation against a number of parties involved. So what can we in Congress and law enforcement do to help remove these images?
It's a very good question, Congressman. The first thought that I had when Masha asked me that question last summer as to whether or not we could remove her pictures from the internet was in the nature of copyright law, whether or not we could gain any sort of legal control over them so that we would have at least a remedy or a cause of action or some way to assert a legal claim over the images.
This hearing led to a law that passed later that year. They called it Masha's Law. It paved the way for punitive damages for victims of CSAM for the very first time. James Marsh is the lawyer you heard in that government hearing. He was still a young lawyer when he represented Masha.
I was representing this 13-year-old girl who had been, now we would say, trafficked from Russia. She was adopted in the international adoption system by a pedophile who did not even have a bedroom for her when she was brought to his home at the age of, I think Masha was 8 years old and only spoke Russian. And, here's your client. What are you going to do for this girl? And in a world in which she said, the only thing I want is for my images to be taken off the internet. That's your job, Mr. Marsh, as my lawyer.
How old was she at this point?
She was 13. And, the real challenge of being first to anything, victims' rights were very, very new in the United States. Victim notification was very, very new. I have the first victim notification, which is a typed letter from a U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. for Masha's case. So I was in this, this point of having all this training and all this, knowledge and ability, but not understanding any of the things that I was confronting. And so quite simply, part of the unbelievable part of this story, which is absolutely true, is I opened the book, the law books, the federal code where child pornography was criminalized, and started reading through it and saw this provision in the code that basically said, for lack of a better word, victims of child pornography shall receive restitution. Shall is pretty clear to lawyers that that's like a must. You must do these things. And the law relating to this said shall 3 times. I said, well, shall. That's a lot of shalls. So perhaps on naivete, thinking that, geez, this seems pretty understandable to me. Everyone else must understand this. Everyone else must be doing this because it says shall and it's right here. It's not a big complicated law. We filed the first restitution request for a victim of child pornography in history. And again, did not feel like a history-making moment. It just felt like this is what you do because this is what the statute says. But it sort of went off like a bomb at the Department of Justice because they had never seen this before.
I'm Robert Cribb, and this is Arachnid. Fast forward 20 years. James Marsh is still dedicating his work to young people, but now he's fighting big tech in the highest courts of the U.S. with massive lawsuits. He first cut his teeth in law representing juveniles in hectic New York City courtrooms.
I was in New York City family court at a time when there were 60,000 children in the New York City foster care system, and the crack epidemic was raging, and we had caseloads of 200 kids. We had no phones. We had no phone system, no computers. I mean, it's sort of looking back, sort of, like, how did we ever last a day? I mean, handwritten notes in the files. And my first trial as a new lawyer was in front of Judge Judy, who was the administrative judge at the New York Family Court.
You mean the TV judge?
Yes, the TV judge.
Your first appearance
My
before
first
Judge Judy.
Brand new, little Midwestern boy in the big city. Mr. Marsh, bring your first witness. It is not an act, folks. This is the true Judge Judy. In the midst of a storm of despair, crack babies were the thing of the time, right? And just social deterioration that started in New York in the 70s, and so it was a crazy time and a very good training for a new lawyer, because and this is what I wanted, right? I wanted to be in court. I wanted to figure out what that's about. And I tell my new lawyers, you didn't have judges screaming at you. You didn't have judges blowing smoke in your face. So it was really good training for me. And it was really a good experience in terms of being capable of dealing with anyone and anything when you're in that environment. Judge screams at me now, judge yells at me, people call me it's not worse than Judge Judy when you're 24 years old.
What's you been through, Judge Judy? Everything's
I got a lot of
relative.
Judge Judy stories. I was on TikTok once telling the stories, and somebody we're putting this on TikTok. So left New York, went to Washington, D.C., saw a
James Marsh believes his job is to make judges feel uncomfortable. For the past 20 years, he's had one mission. He's turned what some people like to call a victimless crime into cases focused on real people who are being harmed. While Arachnid crawls the internet day and night looking for amorphous offenders, James Marsh and the survivors he represents show up in courtrooms across the country, bringing judges face to face with the truth.
You don't see a lot of victims of crimes in federal court. You see, Madoff, you see financial crimes, you see drug crimes, like that. But you don't see victims, like I was victimized by this person, and you don't see children at all. So we were a first in many different ways, right? First restitution, first child victim, first identified child victim. And you begin to realize the power by these kids when you show up in court with them. And the judges have never seen this before. And so my biggest challenge was not the law in all of this, it's educating the judges about the crime and the victims. That was the biggest challenge. Changing the language from victimless crime to a victim. Changing the language from child pornography to child sex abuse materials. So the biggest challenge was making these victims relevant to the process, telling their story, making sure the right language is being used that respects the trauma that these victims have undergone and gives the court system writ large a respect and appreciation for these victims. And how did we end up doing that? by basically filing, restitution requests in every federal court in the country. So I can't go anywhere in the United States of America where a judge hasn't heard my name or the FBI isn't aware of what I do. So I have to be very good no matter where I am because I'm easily identifiable. And just because the problem is so vast and so huge that we had to be everywhere all the time with this crime, which again is a very unusual crime because it's not rooted in time and place, but it goes on forever.
You now know the scope and breadth of this problem. How would you characterize the scope of this problem?
There has been a unwilling acceptance of the ubiquity of this material, right? So we really need to grapple with the normalization, acceptance, and legitimization of the worldwide infrastructure that promotes and supports the wide distribution of this material. I had a very large, very powerful tech company this week argue to me in papers that Section 230 gives them the right to have child pornography on their platforms, that they're not liable because Congress wanted to shield them from liability for child pornography on their websites. So I look back, let's do a very brief history lesson to the early 80s, the Ferber case, which basically removed child pornography from First Amendment protection, which is extraordinary in this country. All of you reporters know this, even if you're in Canada and appreciate the power of the First Amendment in our country. Very little speech has been categorically exempted from the First Amendment, but child pornography was really with quite prescience of that day because of the harm to the children and the images. And even in the 80s, the court recognized, the United States Supreme Court recognized the lifelong impact of images that the court then, decades, 50 years ago, found was worse than the child sex abuse itself. The point here is that the person being charged under Ferber, under New York law, was a distributor. He was a distributor of magazines. He didn't produce it. He didn't possess it. He wasn't masturbating to it in his bedroom. He was the guy selling the magazine. And he even testified that he didn't know what was in the magazine. But he was selling quote unquote dirty magazines. He was a distributor. That's it. He was sent to prison as a distributor. Okay, so fast forward, 50 years later, you'd think anyone distributing child pornography or CSAM should probably be in jail, except if they're any of the tech platforms, because they claim that Congress has exempted them from the same consequences that Mr. Ferber faced. To me, this is an extraordinary conclusion, unsupported by the law, certainly immoral, if you want to talk morality, and unethical and completely contrary to society's responsibility to children.
The public, and particularly the parents in this room, know that...
Let's get back to a more recent Senate hearing from January 2024.
...provide the kind of safeguards that children and parents deserve.
Here's Senator Richard Blumenthal questioning Meta's CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Blumenthal is pressing him about a recent lawsuit brought by parents of kids who have been harmed on Meta platforms.
Mr. Zuckerberg, do you believe that you have a constitutional right to lie to Congress?
Senator, no, but
well, let me just
you just put up a
clarify
bunch
for
of things.
you.
I'd like the opportunity
let me
to
just
respond
clarify
to
for you. In a lawsuit brought by hundreds of parents, some in this very room, alleging that you made false and misleading statements concerning the safety of your platform for children, you argued in not just one pleading, but twice, in December and then in January, that you have a constitutional right to lie to Congress. Do you disavow that filing in court?
Senator, I don't know what filing you're talking about, but I testified
filing
honestly
from-
and truthfully, and I would like the opportunity to respond to the previous things that you showed as well.
Well, I have a few more questions, and let me ask others who are here, because I think it's important to put you on record. Who will support the Kids Online Safety Act? Yes or no? Mr. Citron.
There are parts of the...
Marsh is not the only one who has repeatedly appeared in Washington to give kids and victims a voice. Leanna MacDonald from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection has flown in from Winnipeg many times to get U.S. government lawmakers to listen.
We go to the White House and we meet with the White House principals. At the time, they're at the front of the room. On the side, we have all of the major tech companies, probably the big 5 or 6 at the table, with very senior leadership sitting there. On the opposite side, we have ministers, home secretaries from the Five Eye governments, and at the back, there we are, myself and these young, brave women. You can imagine their legs are shaking. They're sitting here in front of these titans. And each get maybe 2 minutes to tell their horror stories. And every single one of them shakes, cries, and reads their story. There were tears in the room. Everybody was, I could say, horrified by what they heard. One of the girls at the end, it took her 2 minutes to stop crying before she could speak and say her power. And then we had the tech companies basically ramble and take up the whole time talking about all the things they were doing. There was not one acknowledgement in the right way about what just unfolded in front of them. And then you fast forward this many years later, and I would say in terms of what we are seeing tied to those victims and other victims of child sexual abuse material, it's worse now than it was then. So Dr. Hani Farid, tells the important history lesson here. He was the father of photo DNA 15 years ago. And he will tell you how since then, with all the possibilities and the exact gaps, how there has been no motivation for tech to do anymore. So really, we're supposed to sit back and believe that they care? I don't think so.
How are ya?
You guys couldn't drive together?
This is about as far as you can get from Silicon Valley, eh?
That's not by accident.
It's by design.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll remember Hani Farid. You can't miss his passionate and outspoken voice. And you also can't miss where he stands. He's kind of had it with big tech. So we didn't meet up with him in California, where he works. Instead, it was a lakeside cottage in Vermont.
Just kept going. Hey, I'm Hani.
Good to meet you, man. Rob.
Hey, nice to see you, Rob. Hey.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Finally found you.
I'm so sorry. I know this is not the easiest. This is you say this is as far. Rob is saying this is as far from Silicon Valley as you get. I'm like, that is not an accident. I used to live in Vermont. I was at Dartmouth College before.
Yeah, cool.
And we just wanted to get literally as far as possible from anything.
Well, you made it.
Let's talk about Arachnid.
Yeah.
At what point do you come into contact with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection?
First of all, I don't know if you know, I have a tattoo of the Arachnid spider.
Okay, so I was going to ask you about it. Are you okay to talk about it?
Yeah,
Let's see it.
sure.
So this is your left forearm.
My left forearm. It's the Arachnid spider and then the wings of Isis. I'm Egyptian by heritage, and so this is the wings of a protector. So this is my chimera. I asked Leanna for permission to do this, by the way, because I felt like this is their logo.
So this is, you have on your forearm, is this your only tattoo? Or do you have, this is your only tattoo? Yeah. You have the icon of the Canadian Center for Child Protection's Arachnid technology. Yeah. This is extraordinary.
Anyway, when did I first get in touch with the Canadians? I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember it was Leanna, and I'm sure we were at some event together on this, and I had spoken at it, and Leanna did what Leanna does well. She came up to me and she said, "You are now in our tent." And I remember thinking, I don't think I have a choice in this. And she, of course, is a force of nature. And I had heard of the Canadian Center, of course. We got to talking and she was telling me what they were doing. And I remember thinking, God, this is amazing. I mean, this tiny little Oregon, Winnipeg, Canada, is probably doing more than anybody in the world to tackle this problem. I mean, talk about a small group of dedicated people trying to tackle a big problem. And I remember saying to her, "Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll help."
So basically, this little team of coders working in the basement of this building in Winnipeg, Manitoba, take the photo DNA technology, and the genius that they brought to it was this idea of proactively going out, scraping the web, then using photo DNA to identify clearly illegal material, and then demand that it be removed. So that was the
genius. And I'm sure that the impetus came from, we are sick and tired of asking Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all these other companies to do something. Let's do it ourselves.
Here's what strikes me as we're talking here. So the big first revolutionary step here, photo DNA, it's you and a couple people sitting in the lab in Dartmouth. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And
then the evolution happens, Arachnid. It's Lloyd and a couple people
in the basement in Winnipeg.
Why is it left to this little ragtag group of people to take on this massive social plague?
Yeah. Meanwhile, you have entire governments that could tackle this problem. You have trillion-dollar companies that could tackle this problem. So why? Because, first of all, the government here in the U.S. is completely dysfunctional and has been dysfunctional for a long time. We can't even get our heads around this problem. And number two is because the tech companies do what the tech companies do. They privatize the profits and they socialize the costs. They don't want to solve society's problems, right? These companies aren't there to make the world a better place. They're there to maximize shareholder profits. And so they're doing what they do. And since the government isn't holding their feet to the fire, all right, this is the world we occupy now.
So you appeared before Congress.
Yeah, maybe half a dozen times I've testified before the Senate and Congress.
And so you sat in front of senators and Congress people, and you said these words, and what was the reaction that you got?
When the camera's on, outrage. I am outraged by this, and this will not stand. And as soon as the camera turns off, it's go on with their day, and nothing happens.
So you don't feel that any of those appearances, that any of the evidence that you brought forward had any tangible material impact?
Absolutely none. Nothing. I mean, some bills got drafted. Everybody got to applaud themselves for drafting bills, but they didn't get passed. So what are we doing? We could pass a law tomorrow that says this is what you have to do or you get shut down. And they will. And here's how I know I'm right. Because before we passed the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, the DMCA here in the US, this is in the early days of the internet where everybody's ripping off music and writings and movies. The internet giants then said, hey, we can't do anything about copyright infringement. It's the internet. And if you do this, you will destroy the internet. There will be no internet. And because the movie and music industry lobby were so powerful, they passed the DMCA. And you know what happened the next day? Everybody got really good at taking copyright information. And you know what else happened is the internet flourished. It was exactly the opposite, because we got iTunes and Spotify, and we created a fair marketplace for these things. And so when we decided to pass a law, and by the way, what does it say about a society
that passes a law decades ago to protect the financial interests of the movie and music industry and not kids. What does that say about us as a country? I don't know what it says, but it's not good. We have done this before. We have been here before and we did it, and it actually worked. And it worked for everybody, and it worked fairly well. So I don't buy the lie. I actually think our government officials could do something. They just choose not to.
Okay, tell me your theory on
Here's
why.
my theory on why. First of all, say what you will about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and I can say a lot. I don't think they actually like child sexual abuse. I don't think they want this to be happening. I think they're indifferent to it, but here's why I think they're not doing something about it. They don't want to crack the door open. So you have to understand about what they do is they monetize human-generated content, right? And so if we go to them and say, look, you got to do something about this, and they do, well then we've opened the door, because now we have to deal with terrorism. Now we have to deal with criminal activity. Now we have to deal with dangerous disinformation campaigns. Now we have to deal with all kinds of awful things because they've shown us a path forward. But they don't want a path forward, right? What they want to say is, look, we're a huge internet company. We're the wire. You can't hold us responsible for what's on here. Once you show that you can solve this problem, then you got to deal with the other problems. Now, the big fat lie is we've already done it with the copyright material. Nobody has put two and two together to be like, wait a minute, this is the same problem. And so I think that's what it is. And it's not that removing child sexual abuse material would be bad for business or that having it is good for business. It's that once you open that door, now the floodgates open. And now you have to deal with all the things that are awful and criminal on your network, and they don't want to.
So you think they look at this problem behind closed doors in the boardroom and they see it as an unpleasant, unintended consequence of protecting free speech, and we just have to live with it?
Here's the big fat lie about free speech. So Mark Zuckerberg likes to wrap himself around the Constitution and free speech, but here's the problem with that story he tells everybody. When he created Facebook, what is the first thing he banned? Legal adult pornography. The very content in the United States on which First Amendment law was established. He is not a First Amendment absolutist. He bans protected speech. In fact, across his networks. Why is now the question to ask. And here's the reason. Because if he didn't, he knew that his services would be carpet bombed with adult pornography. And who doesn't like that? His real customer, the advertisers. We are not the customer, we're the product. I don't understand how these people get up in the morning and look at themselves in the mirror. I honestly don't. I don't know how you wake up knowing these truly horrific things are happening on your thing. Your network, your services are being used to sell kids. They literally could be superheroes, and they chose to be supervillains. How do you not take that kind of power and wealth and say, not on my watch, I'm gonna fix that? There's obviously something in your brain that makes you think about the world as like, nope, I need a yacht the size of a small island. That's what I'm gonna do with my money. I don't know how you make it through the day, honestly. That yacht must be really nice.
Let me ask you to look ahead.
Yeah.
Because all of this is obviously quite negative. You don't see a lot of positive movement forward.
No.
The stakes are incredibly high, as we've been saying. So when you look ahead 10 years on this issue, what does it look like?
I think it's getting worse. I don't think we've actually made the problem better. I think we've made it less worse, but I think it has gotten worse. It's just maybe slightly less worse than it would have been without this technology and without the public awareness. There is nothing in the last 15 years that I can look at. I mean, there's what the Canadians are doing. There's Arachnid. There's a few efforts that I am grateful for, but I feel like we're outgunned. I feel like the bad guy is getting more sophisticated. There are more and more people every day who want this content, stumbling upon the content, getting engaged by the content, and we're not keeping up. Because you said it earlier. You know, one guy at Dartmouth and a couple of people at Microsoft and a small group in Winnipeg against what? Everybody else? I mean, that's insane. So I'm an optimistic person by nature. I'm not a pessimist, despite working in this awful space. I really am genuinely an optimist. But in this particular regard, there's nothing in the last 15 years that I can look at and saying the trajectory is in the right way. I think we're going absolutely in the wrong direction, and things are getting worse.
You have kids?
No. Thank God.
You do not?
Yeah. Not because of this, but it's certainly helped.
Really?
Yeah.
You consciously chose not to have kids because of the...
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I married late, which helped with the decision, but I'm terrified. By the way, I'm terrified for all my friends who have kids online. I think it's terrifying. I think the real world's terrifying too, but it is nothing compared to what can happen to you with an iPad in your room for 20 minutes. The thing that shocks me about the young victims that I've spoken with, I always imagined, it's amazing how many times I'm just dumb and wrong about this problem. I always imagined that the grooming unfolded over weeks, months. It can be minutes. It's literally somebody with an iPad in the room, and it can happen in minutes. And so if you ask me, where is change going to come from? You'd say, well, let the marketplace solve it. Let somebody come in with a better, safer product and consumers will use it. But they won't, right? Because there's monopolies and there's what's called the network effect. And so people aren't going to go use another network because that's not where anybody is. So the marketplace can't solve this problem. Bad press, we've been trying that for 10 years. That's not going to solve the problem. Advertisers fleeing, maybe, but we've seen it over and over again. They'll flee for a little bit and then they'll come back because they want to make money too. So what's left? Liability, lawsuits. I mean, look, let's be honest. In the history of America, this is the one thing that has actually moved the needle. We have safer products because we've started suing people to the dark ages when they created bad products. I think lawsuits are going to start to move the needle. And I think the magic is going to be when they do discovery. Because once they get through summary judgment and discovery happens, we're going to find where the dead bodies are buried. And it's going to be bad for these tech companies. My fear is they're going to settle out for a few $1 billion. It's going to be the price of doing business, and their stock will go up through the roof, and they'll make it back in a day. But I do think we have to get companies to factor in liability. Look, why is it that when we buy products that we bring into our homes, they're relatively safe? Because these companies have been told, you create a faulty product that you knew or should have known is going to cause damage, I'm going to sue you back to the dark ages. So they factor it in. They take the cost of making their products safer because they don't want to get sued. You can't say that about tech companies. And once that changes, though, the calculus changes. I think this is all it is. It's a calculus. All right, what's the cost of doing the right thing? What's the cost of not doing the right thing? Shareholders do better here. Fuck it, let them die. I think that there's nothing, it's not a particularly complicated equation.
So you live in the center of all of this.
Sadly.
Silicon Valley. It just feels like there's a moral vacuum.
Yes. I hate it. I hate it so much. I want to leave. So I lived in Vermont, New Hampshire for 20 years when I was at Dartmouth College, and my wife got a great offer from Berkeley. She really did, and she's a computational neuroscientist, and it was hard to turn that job down. And I remember the conversations, and I remember saying, I don't want to live in Silicon Valley because it's a soulless, morally bankrupt part of the world. And I was right. It really is. It really is. And so when you first came to the door, you said to me, this is as far away from Silicon Valley as you can get. And I said, by design. So we are in Grand Isle, Vermont, 25 miles south of the Canadian border, literally on an island surrounded by water. 4 hours from Boston, 6 hours from New York. I can't even get on an airplane if I wanted to go back to the Bay Area, and I don't. My wife we're coming at the tail end of our sabbatical, and she's been saying, I'm scared you're not going to come home. And I said, you should be, because I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back.
When you come to visit James Marsh in New York City, you realize you're a very long way from the serenity of Hani's Hideaway by Lake Champlain in Vermont. The Marsh law firm is right around the corner from Hudson Yards, one of the sleekest developments in the U.S. It's a shiny, glittery place built across a former rail yard, close to the Hudson River. The never-ending high energy of downtown Manhattan is a pretty good metaphor for the relentlessness of James Marsh. He never steps away from a fight. He's got one of the biggest lawsuits in the U.S. for over $1 billion against Apple. It alleges the company has allowed the spread of child sexual abuse material unimpeded through its iCloud service and its devices. As you can imagine, Apple does not see it that way. The company has filed a motion in the U.S. asking the court to dismiss the lawsuit. Here's what they say in their court submission. Quote, CSAM is abhorrent, and Apple has worked hard to fight the spread of CSAM on its services. We reached out to Apple on numerous occasions to ask for an interview or a response to statements made in this series. They did not respond. Marsh says the biggest thing standing in his way now is Section 230. You'll recall, it is that little bit of an old law that basically gives tech companies a ton of immunity.
Section 230 precludes plaintiffs from bringing lawsuits. It is an absolute bar to the lawsuit. And so courts, when confronted with these issues, have almost summarily basically said, well, tech has immunity, so we're dismissing your lawsuit. No discovery, no testimony, no information about how the platforms are working, no information about anything other than you get to be a get out of jail card, right? Come and sue me, get out of jail, goodbye. So we have no development of the law in this area over the last 40 years, right? And like many other things in common law countries, it's often judges that decide what are reasonable, unreasonable. Is it reasonable to leave child pornography on a website for 48 hours, 36 hours, 2 weeks, 2 months? What seems reasonable? What are the standards that tech should live by? Just like cars, automobiles. Everyone else has seatbelts. Your car doesn't have seatbelts. Is it reasonable for a car not to have seatbelts? Given the cost, given the harms. These are things that courts deal with every day. But because of Section 230, none of these issues have been grappled with. And like I found when litigating the issue of restitution, once this, train gets running down this track, because we are based on precedent. So once some little judge in some little place in America says, Prodigy is, immune from lawsuits from Section 230. This was not even a reported decision. Not even a reported decision. You know how many times that unreported decision from 30 years ago has been cited to support the notion that tech is immune from liability? That's a problem in the law, right? That's a We're like, Judge, this is a unreported decision from the Western District of Texas from 1996. That's what we're dealing with. That's the standard that has dug its way into jurisprudence. And so advocates like me have got to unwind the clock, unwind the clock. Similar to this discussion with Ferber. Mr. Ferber is a distributor, Your Honor. Facebook is a distributor. What's the difference? Courts are starting to grapple with this issue. Courts are starting to see this. This is criminal contraband, right? Contraband's okay? Here's my victim. Look at the impact. So we are forcing judges to rethink, very, very difficult thing to do because we are a law system built on precedents. What did other judges say? What other courts say? What does the circuit court say? Well, that's the law. Boom. Sorry, Mr. Marsh. That's the law. Like, we're having to unwind this to basically say, well, let's look at the premise. Was the premise right in 1996 in an unreported decision in district court in Texas? And rebuild the infrastructure, basically, of the law to show that it's taken the wrong path, at least with regards to child sex abuse material. And fortunately, courts have been responding. very slowly. At the same time, that big tech is fighting very, very hard in Washington, D.C. and capitals around the world to maintain tech hegemony. And they are fighting us on bills to write in Section 230 to child pornography, expecting the time when Section 230 goes away and victims of child pornography and online exploitation are going to be the only people subject to Section 230 because of what tech is doing today as we speak in Washington, D.C. They are insulating themselves, believe it or not, for liability for child pornography by writing it into the child pornography law that they are immune. So the defenseless, victims, survivors, children that are exploited worldwide, big tech wants a get out of jail card for those kids only, even if they're liable for everything else. Believe it or not, that's what they're doing.
So, do you feel that this work that you're doing through the courts, in light of all of the challenges that you face, will ultimately save kids?
I heard a very interesting interview on the civil rights movement, probably in association with MLK Day back in January. And what was interesting to me was we look at the civil rights and we, see Martin Luther King out there on the bridge and out there, and all these things created a change. But if you look at social movements, you look at the Vietnam War, how many protests were there in the Vietnam War? Over a decade, right? How many protests? How many people died? Civil rights movement, how many sit-ins? How many lawsuits? How many actions? We don't look back to the 50s or the 60s when this all started, right? We see the big marquee moments and we think, oh, that's the change, right? That's the point that change happened. It took a long, long, long time to turn the tide. And it's not about a holiday where, hey, Martin Luther King did it. That something happened, like he's it. It took a lot of people doing a lot of things, little things, maybe insignificant things that didn't work, things that failed, things that no one knew about. Maybe made the local paper, but that's it. Over many, many years and decades to force change. And so, in my opinion, where we are today is that moment. We have the little things that are happening, right? We have the efforts, we have the law, we have the policy, we have the newspapers that now understand are grappling with it. We have the parents who are experiencing the impacts. We have children who've tragically died. People are engaged. Something's wrong here. Politicians are going to be 10 years behind us, right? And like civil rights, like these, infrastructures of society, we've created a techocracy that is not easily dismantled, right? I mean, they started as nothing and now they're billion, trillion, the wealthiest companies in the world who have a lot of vested interest. And so, like so many other things, it's going to take a lot of effort by a lot of people over the next 10 years on all of these fronts: social awareness, engagement, complaints, litigation, state laws, federal laws, losing and starting over again, reframing the issues, and engaging with the companies that are doing this to try to make change. And so I don't think it's going to come from any one case. I don't think it's going to come from any, one decision. I don't think it's going to come from any one law that's going to change the tide. But I think if you look at similar efforts over time, you're going to see that it's going to be a lot of little things over many, many years that is going to result in fundamental change.
So, as you come up the stairwell, you see a set of photographs with pictures, in many cases, chosen by the family. And there we have their names, and we have their dates of birth and passing, if that was the case. And in others where the child has never been located, we have the date of missing plus still searching. So this is right across Canada, children are represented. And so again, it really helps remind us every day, coming into work every day, I walk up this staircase, and every day I look at some or all of these photos.
The Canadian Centre for Child Protection started long before the internet was even a thing. Leanna MacDonald's early experiences were mostly with physical abductions and missing children. These days, she's focused on childhoods that are lost in plain sight, on very public online platforms.
Why has this been such a difficult road, given, I think anyone listening to this will say, I mean, of course we should not have this kind of material freely available. Of course we shouldn't have child pornography available with a few clicks of a mouse. Why do you think the things that you're talking about are still elusive?
I think because there have been so many historic mistakes in product design, in a whole bunch of things, that we have a larger mess in front of us that is not as simple to deal with. I think now as well, we have companies getting nervous about accountability. And, the difference is there is pretty much no transparency for companies to open up the curtain to show what they're doing well and what they're not. And so there's a lot of hiding going on in terms of how bad things are. And I think that is the reality. On top of it, all of this bad construction has allowed for the worst of the worst in human behavior. So now you have human beings who have been afforded the cloak of anonymity, that have been able to connect with like-minded people and take full advantage of every opportunity to make it worse.
So it sounds like you've asked nicely, it didn't work, and your plan now is a hammer, which is legal action of some kind.
Correct.
Okay, let me hand you the magic wand. What would you do with it?
I think that this is a complicated question. What I would say is there are some absolute things that can be done. So when we look at Project Arachnid and all of its endless possibilities, there are ways that we can do some immediate things. So if you look at known images and videos of child sexual abuse material, we are strongly screaming for upload prevention, meaning that companies use the tools in Arachnid to block the re-uploading of this material that has surfaced over and over again. There's absolutely no justification for any tech provider or company not to use a tool like that, which is free, which does not require a ton of infrastructure, that absolutely would send a message to every survivor of this horrific crime: you matter.
It seems like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you? And the fact that they haven't, again, makes me more distrustful of tech companies and just kind of this darkness in the world. Like, how much worse does the problem need to get before they're finally going to step up and help?
What would it mean to you personally if tomorrow there was aggressive legislation compelling large technology firms to implement aggressive filtering.
I couldn't think of a better feeling. I would feel joy, absolute joy. I know it wouldn't end it forever. That can't be done for me at this point. At least it's been around way too long. But I know at least it would probably help so many others. And those that are to come, it would help them so much. It would probably just, I mean, it's a hydra. You cut a head off, more are gonna grow, right? But you're at least cutting heads off. And for some, it could be the decisive factor in changing their future. And even just knowing that.
Is it too late? Is big tech now so powerful that the kinds of solutions you're calling for are just simply not in their interests?
I have to hold on to my optimism that we can get over this, that this is not going to be easy. When you ask me, are we too late? We're 15, 20 years too late. But it doesn't mean we don't do our damnedest to get up, stand up, and fix it. You know, one day there's going to be an inquiry, and we're all going to be brought to task, and we're all going to be asked the question, how did you let this happen? And, you know, I say to the team when, you know, we're doing all the hard work and the work that we're doing, we will be able to show up with our heads held high and be the truth tellers about the absolute horrific crimes against children and childhood.
Arachnid was reported by me, Rob Cribb, and Wendy Ann Clark from the Investigative Journalism Bureau. Written and produced by Bruce Edwards and Suzanne Reber. Allison Leighton Brown composed our theme and original music. Mix and sound design by Bruce Edwards. Data sonification by Michael Corey. Field recordings by Shahryar Tajvidi and Bruce Edwards. And Jasmine El-Kur designed our artwork. Arachnid was created by our executive producer, Suzanne Reber. Our show is a production of TVO Today in collaboration with Piz Gloria Productions, the Investigative Journalism Bureau, and the Toronto Star. Our TVO team includes Shahryar Tajvidi, senior showrunner, Lori Few, executive producer of Digital, John Ferry, vice president of programming and content, and thanks to JP Fozo and Sean Pattenden, my audio colleagues at the Toronto Star. And as we wrap up our series, Arachnid, Hunting the Web's Darkest Secrets, we want to express our sincere gratitude to Leanna McDonald and the team at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection for their willingness to help us tell this highly sensitive story. Most of all, thanks for the courage of all the survivors who shared their stories with us on and off the mic. If you appreciate listening to Arachnid and believe in this kind of deeply reported and immersive storytelling, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.